Hey folks, today I'm going to talk about used boats, purchasing a used boat, what I personally look for in a fishing machine, and how to avoid from buying a lemon. So let's go over that right now. Real quick, before we get started, I want you folks to know that when I look for a used boat, I'm looking for a fishing machine. I don't care what it looks like. I don't really care the names on the motor or on the boat. I am looking for the boat or the fishing machine that's going to put the most fish in the live well for me, and then the boat that's going to give me the least amount of headaches. So if those two things match up, that is the used boat that I'm looking for. First, let's talk about the type of trailer that you might be looking for. Now, between rollers and bunks, I prefer bunks. And the reason being is that I fish by myself quite a bit. So when I back my boat into the water, I like to leave it unhooked so it just kind of comes up and off. And by doing so, on bunks, the boat sticks to those bunks a little better or tighter than, let's say, rollers do. Rollers, that boat can slide right off. So if you're going on a boat launch that has a little bit of an incline or decline, actually, that boat on rollers can slide off and land on the concrete or pavement. And I know somebody personally who did that. And so for me, I like the bunks. Once again, it's a personal preference. Some people prefer rollers, some people prefer bunks. But for me, fishing by myself, I like bunks because that boat just sticks to those bunks a little bit better. And once again, I don't have to worry about the boat rolling off. Let's talk about boat motors and how much horse should you have for a particular boat. Now, I have a 16.5-foot Fishhawk Crestliner boat, and I have a 90-horse Yamaha motor on it. And for this particular boat, this is the highest amount of horsepower I can have on this Crestliner. So when you purchase a boat, you really should always purchase a boat that has the max amount of motor on it. The boat is going to perform the way it's supposed to perform. Even if you have one or two extra passengers in it, you're going to be able to get up on plane a lot easier. It's a little bit better for rougher water, trying to keep up on top of the waves if that water's a little rougher. Otherwise, you're going to be into those swells a lot more. So whenever you look for a used boat, my personal opinion is to always max out that motor or have the max amount of motor on that particular boat. I see some people, try to save a little bit of money. They'll have a little bit of a lesser motor on that boat for whatever reason. And you always talk to them and they'll say, you know what, I wish I would have had more motor on that boat. Just because they know it's not performing as well as it could be. Kind of like buying a full-size pickup truck and you got a little V6 or a V4 banger in there. That is one thing, even myself being a frugal guy, you always want to max out that motor on your fishing boat. Another thing to consider is whether you want, like the Crestliner here, all weld, or a riveted boat like Lund or Alumacraft, and there's quite a few others out there. For me personally, I like the welds. It's just because I know that over time, rivets can leak. Now, the welds can crack as well, but I've talked to other Crestliner owners, and they mentioned to me that they've never had an issue with a weld crack. And I know that this boat, for the next 100 years, should float and do its thing. So for me, I prefer welded boats, but they make a lot of good riveted boats out there as well. London and Alumacraft being two of them. The next thing I want to talk about is whether you should get console or tiller. Now, the tillers have been, a famous boat for the walleye fishermen for many, many years. I enjoy walleye fishing. It's my primary species that I enjoy fishing for. But, they each have their advantage and disadvantage. So I'm going to go over that right now. Now, the console here, it's nice. It puts you up front. If you're in rough conditions, you can see out in front of you easier for other boaters, maybe rock piles, islands, whatever you have in front of you during those rough conditions. The other thing about the console is just kind of nice to be able to drive right up here. You got your electronics close to you. You don't have to reach down as far. Let's say if you're on in a tiller, and it's just kind of nice to have everything like a vehicle essentially, and driving from that perspective. The console is probably more popular than the tiller, obviously. The other thing I like about the console too is that with my trolling motor, I have a Tarova, so I have to go up and unlatch it and manually put it down. And I like it at the front of the boat, here, the bow of the boat. So for me, I am halfway to that trolling motor when I get up and put it back down, Where if I'm in a tiller, then I have to go all the way through the entire boat up to the very front and then put it back down and then maybe all the way back, or depending upon where I'm going to fish. So it kind of saves from that purpose and walking over people as well. So I can go from here, pop up into the front seat real quick, and then back to the console. So the console does have that advantage. Now, some of the disadvantages of the console is it takes up extra room. So one nice thing about a tiller is that when you are sitting in the back, you have a much bigger layout and you can have more room for your tackle boxes, for people. I know a lot of the guides, the fishing guides in northern Wisconsin, they like tillers because it allows more room for their clients. Maybe if you're a muskie fisherman, you have those big muskie boxes. Those are usually preferred sometimes by the tillers, the tiller guys. And, you know, they just happen to have more room when you're in a tiller. You have more boat control, actually, believe it or not. A lot of people aren't aware of this. I had a tiller prior to this boat, and when I would load up to a dock or pull in on top of a spot, I had much more control with it, and it made it much easier pulling up to a fishing dock when I wanted to bring my boat in for the day. So the tiller was very nice for that. The other thing with the tiller is if you like to troll, all you do is put one hand on that tiller and you can put your rod right out in front of your hand trolling. Now with tillers, the electronics that they've done nowadays, they usually put them right in front to the side. But once again, another disadvantage is that your eyes are usually looking here. And a lot of times it's looking behind the boat and you're not always looking in front. And you know, you're just not sometimes always paying the full attention to what's in front of you. So you might call that a little bit of a disadvantage, where when I'm in my console and when I manually troll, meaning holding a rod off to the side, got my electronics right here, holding that rod, and I'm looking straight ahead as well. Once again, this is a personal preference, console or tiller. I could go either or. I don't really, in this case, have a personal preference. This is kind of nice if I have a guest with me or a fishing partner, fishing buddy, you know, and let's say I want them to just take over and I can just jump out real quick. They can pop in here and take over. Where the tillers, believe it or not, there's a lot of people, if they've never fished out of a tiller before, they have trouble with that directional component on where to go and how to go and so on and so forth. Now, speaking of tillers and consoles, when I first got my console boat, it's kind of funny, you know, I just grew up fishing out of tiller boats and I wasn't aware of how to choke a console boat. And, you know, I didn't actually know it until about 8 months after I owned it. So take the keys, place it into the ignition. And if you want to choke a console boat, because once again, this is for you folks out there who might be buying your first used boat, maybe your first console, push the key in and then turn. When you push it in and then turn, that actually chokes the boat at the same time. So just always kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because I know other guys too who didn't know that as well. And a lot of times you don't need to do it, but here in Wisconsin, if I'm fishing early spring and it's cold out, that boat a lot of times needs to be choked, and I just push that key in and then turn, and that's essentially choking the motor back there. Now, one thing I want to mention is the overall value of the boat, and we're going to kind of bring electronics into this, because when you blue book a boat, or if you try to get a loan from the bank to buy a used boat, the bank and the blue book do not include the electronics on the boat. They only include the boat, the motor, and the trailer. So in some ways you can utilize that just a little bit as a bargaining tool, possibly, but the bank will not see the electronics as anything important. So you could have a $5,000 boat and $8,000 worth of electronics, and the bank will only see that the whole system is worth $5,000, where in reality it might be worth $12,000. With that being said, when I purchase a used boat, I look for the electronics that are already on the boat. That's a huge cost savings to me, especially if it has what I'm looking for. You know, and for me, I want a trolling motor that has spot lock. That just helps out tremendously when you're walleye fishing or muskie fishing. You're hitting these spots after spots. And then the other key component is to have, you know, good electronics. I don't have, you know, super high-end electronics here, but these two Garmin fish finders, one is actually a fish finder side imaging unit, and the other is my mapping system that I utilize. And these do sufficiently well for me. If you do find a boat that has all the electronics that you're already looking for, you're going to save yourself a lot of money because electronics just depreciate so much. The one thing I want to talk about just real quick, I want to touch on are electronics. And some people might be like, Clint, do you like Garmin? Obviously, or Humminbird or Lowrance. Those are probably the three big ones that are out there. But I'm gonna give you a little tip. And I fished with quite a few other people out there, and I got to look at their electronics as well. If you're looking for, I think, the best down imaging and traditional sonar, Garmin is the way to go. It seems to be a little bit better than Lowrance and Humminbird. However, if you are looking for the best side imaging, Humminbird, to me, makes the best mega side imaging. So I'm just going to throw those little two things out there. So if you're looking into maybe one or the other, consider that component. The one nice thing about Garmin, though, is the Garmin fish finders from, I think, even today, they still have the built-in map system, so you don't have to go out and purchase that card. And their maps are actually pretty good, at least very good for the lakes that I fish. And that's one other reason I like Garmin as well. They have that built-in mapping system, and I don't have to mess with that goofy little card and update maps and all that other stuff. It's already built in, and I kind of feel that's a cost-saving measure as well. And Garmin is also, I think, taking leaps and bounds, even in the last 5 to 7 years, as far as their equipment and making the user interface much easier. That's the other thing about Garmin, is that their user interface to be able to navigate in their electronics is, to me, much easier than Humminbird. Let's talk about props real quick. Aluminum versus stainless steel. I have a very good boat mechanic, and he put it to me this way. If the motor is under 100 horsepower, aluminum is the way to go. You're not going to see hardly any difference in regards to a stainless steel prop in that regards. As a matter of fact, a stainless steel prop, if you hit something, it is going to shear and cut a bunch of components within the lower unit. Now, if it is over 100 horsepower, that is where you're going to see a difference in the stainless steel prop. And not only that, the aluminum will bend and dent if I hit rocks, and I don't have to worry about anything damaging in the lower unit. So for me, with the 90 horsepower motor on here, aluminum is the way to go. Real quick, we need to talk about aluminum versus fiberglass. And essentially, aluminum is lighter. When you're hauling your boat to go fishing, and I have a couple hours sometimes to travel to the fishing spots I go to, the aluminum boat's gonna save me gas mileage, money. And when I'm on the water, the aluminum boat is lighter for that motor to push. So it's a little easier on the motor, and I get a little more speed, basically a little bit more speed for the money that I spend on essentially the motor and the boat. Where fiberglass, it is heavier. The other thing too is that your aluminum boats, they tend to get more boat rash. They tend to fade a little bit more over time if they're out in the sun a lot, and they may not look as nice after 20 years, where some of those fiberglass boats, I'll admit, they actually look fairly nice, good condition, after 20 years, but you're dealing with more weight than with that particular boat, and then sometimes you need a bigger motor to push it. It's going to cost you a little bit more in trailering to your lakes. Now, how big of a boat do you really want to go with? And that kind of depends upon the waters that you fish. Now, for me, between Lake Winnebago, Lake Michigan, the Bay of Green Bay, central Wisconsin rivers, northern Wisconsin lakes, I kind of have a boat for me that can kind of do it all, but it's not the master of really any body of water. Now, if I take this on the Bay of Green Bay, a lot of times this boat can be too small, depending upon the wind. And then if I take it up into northern Wisconsin, some of those little backwoods lakes, this boat is too big. So for me, I want a boat that I can go on multiple waters with and to be able to handle by myself. Now, that's probably the big component. I do fish by myself quite a bit. My family does come with me. And I also sometimes have in-laws or my parents that like to come with. And then this boat is essentially too small for that. I fish probably about 80% by myself. I want something that I can handle at the boat launch. And the 16.5-foot boat really is a perfect size for that. My next boat, I think I want to be 17.5, maybe 18.5. But you start to get on some of these boat launches that are not protected, that can make it a little bit of a bear loading and unloading. And then especially some of those lakes that I go into the Northwoods, northern Wisconsin, those bigger boats can be a little troublesome there too. And once again, it always comes back to one thing, at least for me, And if I kind of lose track of mine when it comes to buying boats, is that what boat is going to put the most fish in the live well. That's how I look at it. To me, this is just a tool. I don't care about the glitter. I don't care about the sparkles or anything like that. All I care about is this boat going to put fish in the live well. You know, I think sometimes people get a little carried away of the name, the brand name of the boat, or they get carried away by how fancy it looks, whatever it might be. All I care about is this a fishing machine? Now, I take care of my boat the best I can. When I purchased this boat, it was used. It does have a little bit of boat rash on it, but just because it's an older boat, a used boat, doesn't mean that I don't take care of it any less. Matter of fact, I take care of it even more because I want it to last a long time. And then for resale value, you still want to take care of your boat no matter what. Even if it's a 1979 junker to somebody else, it's going to be a treasure to another person. So always take care of your boat. Let's go over lemons, or boats that tend to be lemons. And I'm going to show you some of the things I look for in buying a used boat to hopefully avoid buying a lemon. So let's go over that right now. So one of the things I look for is at the motor right away on the boat. And I want to see if there has been any markings or areas where tools have been utilized on the particular motor. But here's a prime example. Now, after about 4 years I had this boat, the power tilt and trim would slowly come down on me. And it would probably only come down maybe a foot after sitting for 5-6 hours. It really wasn't that big of a deal. And I kind of wanted to fix it myself. And I opened up the component here that holds the hydraulic oil. And in doing so, I kind of stripped this nut here a little bit. So for me, if I was coming to purchase this particular boat, I would take a look at this and I would notice that this had some paint missing and that the ends are rounded just a little bit. So for me, that would be a cause of concern. And, you know, I wouldn't probably say anything at first. I would ask the owner if anything's ever been done to the boat, see what their response is. And this is kind of a good way to judge the individual that you're buying it from. If they say nothing, okay, all right, take that for what it's worth. But you might find out that they were the only owner of the boat. And then later in the conversation, ask them, was anything ever done back here to the power tilt and trim unit? And then they might be like, oh yeah, I had to fix that. That was broke, whatever the case may be. And then what you just found out is that they're not a truthful individual because you asked them earlier, was anything ever done to the particular boat? I wouldn't hold that against them. I would not bring that up to them, but that is a cause for concern or a red flag. Two red flags. Number one, that something was done to the boat. And number two, that when you asked them earlier, they didn't mention it, but now they mentioned it after you spotted it. So when you go through your boat, look for anything that looks like it had a wrench on it, power tilt and trim, and then in the motor as well. So with that being said, same thing over here. You want to just go and look at all of these components. You know, you don't have to get into extreme details of it and pull stuff apart on their motor. That's going to kind of look bad. But just go over the motor and take a look at all of the nuts, the bolts, and see if anything's been pulled out, stripped out, taken out, and put back together for whatever reason. You can usually tell that by the paint on the bolt, so on and so forth. Or check the wires. You might find a wire, for whatever reason, looks really brand new, and the other wires look old and they might have a little bit of a grease on them. So consider that too when looking at the motor. The one thing that you want to do when you buy a motor is you want to compression test the motor and check the cylinders of the motor to make sure that they're still good. So the first thing you should do is buy one of these muffs. They're anywhere between $10 and $20. They're just great to have when you have a boat too, in case you want to run it outside of being on the water, like you want to run it in your garage. Just put these muffs on. And then the compression test kit, my recommendation is to go to an auto store. I just checked recently at AutoZone near where I live, and you can get a compression test kit for $45. You just lease it for $45, bring it back, and you can do the compression test and then give it back to them, and then they'll give you your $45 back. So it's kind of a nice way to do it for next to nothing or essentially free. Now, the thing I would say is that when you go to somebody's place, let's say somebody's yard, boat dealer shouldn't be an issue, but if you go to somebody's yard, The thing I would say is, do you mind if I compression test your motor? Most cases they will say yes, and you have the muffs here. I would have them put the muffs on, so that way, you know, let's say you didn't know much about the motor and you put the muffs too low or too high, or you missed the water intake component, you'll be able to see the water spitting out. But have them put the muffs on, so that way there's no, you know, issue saying that you did it incorrectly and you blew their motor up. But have them put the muffs on, and then you'll set up or hook up that compression test kit, and then you'll have to look at a chart to see what the normal compression range is for the particular motor that you're looking at, and then compare that to the numbers that you get from the compression test and see how those line up. Now, if the guy that you're getting it from, if he's open to it, there's already a good chance that there shouldn't be an issue. But you know, if somebody's suspect and says, no, I don't want you to do that, well, it might cause for a little red flag. I wouldn't say it's a big red flag. And if that's the case, then I would ask if you could at least take the boat out onto the local body of water, if there's one close by, have him come along and just run the motor out there and see how it runs and go from there. And maybe if you can, get the compression test kit on it while you're on the water. It's a little harder to do, but it can be done. Another question that you're going to want to ask is, what kind of fuel did they run in this motor? Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I am dead against running anything ethanol in an outboard motor. Completely against. I know some motors will say that you can run a little bit, and I know some people will say that they can run a little bit. So the first question I actually will ask is, what type of fuel did you utilize in it? And I don't say ethanol or non-ethanol, because they'll go right to the best fuel right away. Keep it an open-ended question and see what their answer is. If they ran ethanol fuel in that motor, I would actually tend to just walk away completely. I wouldn't even go any further than that, because that ethanol can wreck the cylinders and can cause some issues down the road, especially if it's a used boat, an older boat, and you just don't want to take that chance. So find that out, but once again, keep it an open-ended question to see what their answer is in regards to the type of fuel that they utilize. Some of the other things too that you can look at too is, what does the motor look like? Is it clean looking? This motor here I have is fairly clean looking. You know, I always carry a little component of stable in the compartment. So if you see stuff like stable in the compartment and these little things that you know that they take care of their engine, their boat, give that a green flag, meaning that's a good thing that you saw to have, and you know, consider that into the proposition of buying that particular boat. Another component to buying a boat is make sure that you go through everything. Test the live well, test all the navigation lights, test the power, tilt, and trim. Matter of fact, when you first get there, place the power, tilt, and trim all the way to the very top, and then see what happens after you've been talking, going through everything, if that came down. If you can hit this button after you've been there, let's say for maybe 20 minutes to a half hour, and it goes up, that means that that power, tilt, and trim is leaking a little bit. So consider that as well. And once again, bring it all the way up to the top and keep it up there while you're going through and looking at the boat and talking with the boat owner. So make sure that you go and you push every button on the boat that you can without, you don't want to start the motor without the earmuffs on, but all the electronics, all the navigation lights, the whole 9 yards, push them all just to make sure it works the way it's supposed to. When it comes to motors, okay, this is where it's going to be a little controversial, and I know everybody has their favorite motor, and it's a Chevy Ford thing, and for me, I don't care really what motor that it is. But once again, I have fished with a lot of different guys out there, and I've had my share of used boats. And if I am buying a boat, I want Yamaha, I want Honda, or Suzuki actually I feel makes a pretty good motor as well. Now, I know there's a lot of you that are Mercury fans. I'm here in Wisconsin where Mercury is made. I think some of the newer Mercuries are actually very good, but I've known people who've had some issues with some of the older Mercuries. But Honda to me would be number one, followed by Yamaha, and then Suzuki. Once again, that's my own personal preference as far as motors go. There's a reason that pirates out in the Middle East like Yamahas and Hondas, so consider that. Speaking of motors, a Let me just say there's one motor you really should stay away from, and that is the Force motor, Force. They were a motor that was made, I believe, in the 70s and in the 80s. They were a cheap motor, but I have known a few people out there who've had Force motors, and they are junk. If you see a Force motor out there, avoid at all costs. I don't even think there's too many left out there because they just don't last very long. But if you're buying a used boat, an older used boat, if it's got that Force on it, I would avoid at all costs. Well, folks, I hope this helps you maybe save a little bit of money and helps you to find that boat that you've been looking for to purchase to head out on the water fishing. You know, and to me, fishing is a great way to relax, get out on the water, spend your summer. And also, it's also a great family activity. You know, I take my family out on my boat here, on our boat, I should say, and it's just a way to spend time as a family together. And, you know, there's no better time spent when you're with the ones you love and your buddies out there, your friends out there, and you take them fishing as well. And I'll tell you one thing, if you own a nice fishing boat, you'll never have a shortage of friends. Until next time, Clint from Oak and Iron Outdoors.